So my story with running began in 2013. That's that's what you'll hear a lot of folks talking about or in other podcasts.
hmm
But yeah, so I started running then, and it was a way for me to sort of help manage my depression and anxiety at that time. It was after a breakup, and I was turning to running to sort of avoid having to go see a therapist.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpri. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpri's all new, all natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpri.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. That's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today is a certified running coach and a certified personal trainer. She's an ultra runner who also has a trail running side that she loves to do, which kind of goes with the territory with ultra runners. I don't know that I've met any yet that don't also like going out on the trails. She's the founder of Project Love Run. You can find her on Instagram at Runner Instinct or at Project Love Run. Welcome to the show, Filsan Abdiaman.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. It's always nice. So for you, the listener, this comes out on Fridays, but we also record on Fridays. So I always get the pleasure of kind of kicking off my weekend by talking to really cool people. And though I know that the U.S. and Canada share the largest uncontested border in the world, so we're basically neighbors. I'm like a little kid where I'm like, cool, I'm talking to somebody in another country. Like I know Canada's not that far. I've been to Canada, but there's just something neat about being able to connect to somebody so physically far away. So thanks again for being part of that for me, and again for joining me here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So to kind of get people introduced to you a little bit, I know you didn't really have an athletic background growing up, but you got into running kind of mid 20s. Um, I personally know a lot of people who ran for a long time, and then a lot of other people who are like, why would you ever run? Um, but the amount of people that join or begin running kind of later in life, I think, is a smaller subset of people. So, can you tell us a little bit about your story, how you found yourself deciding to do this thing that,
Mm.
at least from kind of where I come from, there's the people that have been doing it forever, seemingly, and the people that are just like, no, thank you. So, tell me a little about, how you got there.
Yeah, so my story with running began in 2013. That's what you'll hear a lot of folks talking about or in other podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I started running then, and it was a way for me to sort of help manage my depression and anxiety at that time. It was after a breakup, and I was turning to running to sort of avoid having to go see a therapist. So rather than paying for therapy, I chose to run. And I got addicted to it. I should also mention, only in hindsight, as I've grown in this running journey of mine, I've come to realize that there were other factors that led to me embracing the sport of running. And to give you more context, before I was a runner, I was a personal trainer, and I was working out with a trainer as well. I had a trainer, and she actually encouraged me to take up running as a form of cardio to help with my strength training. And I didn't realize it then, but having evolved, you can say, as a runner, and sort of piecing together my story of running, I realized that I was also using running as a tool to control my body. And that led to other complications much later in life, including my history of an eating disorder, disordered eating. But yeah, so there were many factors that contributed to my running. I would say for the longest part, though, however, I was focusing mainly on the running for my mental health story. And that's what I told a lot of folks. But I did realize much later, I would say even just the last few years, that I was using running as a tool to control my body and as a distraction from a lot of emotional turmoil that I was struggling with and just didn't really have the necessary tools to deal with. But I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think you got it. It's it. I I've talked about this with a lot of different guests. The idea of running as therapy, or is running therapy, and um, I think the general consensus is that it is therapeutic, but it is not a replacement for seeing a therapist.
Absolutely.
Um, and I was trying to remember who my first guest it was I talked to about that. And so, if you're watching it, or I'm sure Filson was watching me do this, and you're like, what is he doing? I was trying to look up the guest's name, and it just didn't quite work. But it also reminded me of Sarah McMahon, who I talked with relatively recently in this season. I think my very first guest where I talked to about the therapy was from season 1, so 3 years ago now. Um, Sarah also had an eating disorder, and she ran, I believe, collegiately. Again, episode 134. So check that out, and all of Sarah in her own words, as I'm sure I'm going to paraphrase and mess it up. But she talked about her story about, again, like you using running as a tool, that kind of fed into disordered eating, and then having to, at least for her case, remove herself from running for a little bit to kind of find a more positive place for her before she could come back and be in a more like healthy space, and not be, for her it meant gaining weight, and like being more accepting of who she is. uh, you know I'll say heavier, but I don't mean just in comparison to where she was, um, and knowing like that's perfectly fine. And then going on to the point of like she's actually a stronger runner now than she was then, is able to do more, and is happier with the sport, not as like I'll say stressed, although that's not quite a good enough encompassing word for the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it was for me, I didn't really remove myself from the sport. So what ended up happening is, in my typical manner or fashion, I chose to run away from my problems in Toronto. I was living in Toronto for about 13 years. And then around 2017, I decided to move to Vancouver, BC. And I came here mainly for running, but of course, the thinking was I change location, I will like be a happier person. And over here, a lot of the runners that I came in community with were ultra runners and trail runners. And that's a very different sport than running on road because, yeah, I'm sure you know, it's a lot more, for one, you go at a slower pace, and two, you're out in nature. And it forces you to slow down. It forces you to take note of your surroundings, and there's that heightened self-awareness. So turning towards that, I would say, became this gateway for me to seek therapy because I realized that I was not going to solve any of my problems on my own. But having said that, too, I sort of switched up my approach to running. Every time I would run, there was the intention that I'm running to be alone with my body, to rediscover myself, and to unlearn a lot of stories I told myself about what it is my body should look like, or how it is I should be in my body, and sort of using running to help redevelop that relationship with myself. And that's how self love came to play a big role in my running, because I feel like I never really had that growing up. And it's what led to the creation of Project Club Run. And so, yeah, I switched up my running to fall in love with myself, and that became my goal. And I feel like as a result, I healed my relationship to my body, and became very more in tune with my body. So, yeah.
You were you were talking about working on or changing, maybe disrupting is the right word. Thinking about like cognitive behavioral therapy, like that method is very popular nowadays. Um, the stories, those negative stories, those internalized messages that you had about yourself and who you are and maybe who you should be. Um, Obviously, this is conjecture, so you, the listener, can take it as that. But I do like to ask, like, I think we all internalize different messages that we get from all kinds of different places. Um, so I'd like to ask you about, do you know where those messages came from for you? And um, do you think there's a way that we can, I guess, stop the flow of this kind of negative self-worth and messaging before it gets ingrained in people? So two-parter, I guess.
Okay, so the first part, I think those messages for me just came from the spaces that I was in. So I talked about, being a personal trainer first before I became a runner, and just being in that fitness space. A lot of the messaging there, I later on discovered, is sort of all about policing your body and controlling your body, watching what you eat and making sure you maintain a certain weight or look. There's a certain image that a lot of trainers strive to attain. And those were some of my goals. And so being anything other than that image led to a lot of the problems and complications that I had. And the messaging that I got was like, you had to be this way, thin most of the time, athletic, like lean. Body fat was demonized, and so striving towards that, and not like being able to have that all the time, like um, made me feel like I was not worthy. And, it could just be me and the way I felt. But I think it plays, like, fitness culture does play a big role in folks, and most folks that struggle with body image. And uh, yeah, it's for one that. And then I would also say that and diet culture, it's like they're both the symbiotic parasite, the messaging.
Hmm.
It's like diet culture celebrates what weight loss, and any weight gain is like, a failure. So those messaging is what I was struggling with. And how I started to sort of rewrite all of those narratives and look at things differently is I turned to words, a lot of alternative, you know, I would say also fat activists, and their messaging is that, it's these oppressive systems that make you feel like you are the failure, when really it's something that's much larger than you. It's not the individual. And having that message to lean on really helped me a lot. Um, and yeah, I didn't really do therapy for too long because I couldn't afford it. And so I really had to work towards finding these alternative sources that reinforced the messaging that I am worthy, and this is not my fault in any sort of way. It's the systems and the cultures that hold up those systems that um, make you feel like you're not worthy.
As you're talking, I made a note, but then you already answered my question. But so I'm going to kind of go back to that. I was going to ask you about um, kind of like a little kid. I don't know what age kids do this, but it's like toddler-ish age when they start asking why, and they just ask why, like over and over until you feel like there's no answer left.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like that's a tool we should be using more in our
Mm,
lives.
mm,
You were talking about how inside of that like personal training culture that there's this, I'll say, ideal body image that you're trying to attain. Like that was your goal. And what, obviously you've gone through this, you answered this already. So I'll paraphrase what you said and then please correct me. Um, so like I always like to go, well, why? Like, we get these ideas about, like for me in particular, I wanted to be a pro athlete, and all these things that I want, and but then if you don't stop and go why, sometimes even if you attain those things, you're left empty because you didn't understand the purpose of what you were doing that to begin with. And I think you said um, you felt like you needed to attain this to feel worthy.
mm,
And I feel like that motivates a lot of people, like the need for to be worthy or to be loved or to be accepted. They all kind of live in that same realm where it's like, we want to belong or to be acknowledged or to have some kind of self-worth and like strive
mm.
for this external signal
Yeah.
that we're worthy. Maybe in your case, getting to that, whatever that ideal body image was, or for like me, being a pro athlete and knowing I'm good enough, as an athlete. Um, but that tool of like, why, that toddler, like, why is such an interesting, like, drill down. So I guess what I want to ask is, did you do something like that, or was it a more roundabout way of kind of parsing apart that situation?
Well, for me, it was through community. I would have to say that I came to these conclusions. And so again, to give you more context, I moved to Vancouver. I realized I had to see a therapist to help me because I didn't have all the answers myself. Seeing a therapist really helped me piece together also the why of some of my struggles. And when I left therapy, I started journaling with the intention to just sort of, uncover some of those stories I told myself. And basically, I started writing some love notes to myself. Um, and I, I continued to do that even after like therapy, like for months after. I continued writing to myself. And a lot of this I brought into the community, the intention piece of running with the awareness that you're running in a space that sort of welcomes certain few, doesn't feel welcoming to others, and um, interrogating those things in community, and also doing that inner work afterwards, continuing that inner work afterwards. And so, yeah, I feel like constantly asking why, and then sharing that in community to see the other answers or responses that are there. Um, yeah, I don't know if I lost my train of thought. I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I lose my train of thought all the time. Anybody that listens to this regularly will have heard me say, I don't know what I was gonna ask now. No, so I think you kind of led into it a little bit. Um, but the overarching question is, okay, well, so you all say dealt with your demons, though, we all, I guess I can't speak for you. I guess it's a continual process for
Mm,
me.
yeah.
um, Things pop up from time to time and you go, get back. But so Project Love Run, you know, you worked on yourself. You were already part of the community, so I think that's maybe the answer. But what I want to ask is, well, why start something? I mean, it's a lot of effort, right? Like
Mm,
you've expanded to 5 cities now. Clearly, this is not just you getting together with a couple friends on the weekend um, and calling it a day. Like there's more than that. So can you walk me through the decision or maybe the process of saying, okay, let's try to make this a thing? And did you have the idea that you wanted it to be multi-cities, or was it just like, let's see what happens?
the idea of the multiple cities sort of took root on its own. It was like an organic growth. I was in Toronto when I founded it in 2016. And then when I moved here, because I was, still trying to find a home here and feel like I was at home in a new city, it didn't start up immediately here. And while I was in therapy, I hadn't started it up here. But after my therapy, and when I didn't no longer have that to lean on as a support, it made sense to sort of cultivate this community space here in Vancouver where I would feel supported by other like minded women. And I would be able to share some of my struggles and stories of, struggles that I was facing and feel like I was heard. And just that release in that safe setting was therapeutic. And you know, as you share stories, you realize that your story is not unique. A lot of folks are struggling in the same ways, and that sort of just helps reinforce the messaging that it's not you, it's something bigger than you. And yeah, it is a lot of work to have it in different cities and to keep it going. But I think the beauty of it is that, it's just a community space where we're in all the cities that Project Clevern is in, we're all guided by the same philosophy of where we use running as a medium to emphasize self-love and self-worth. We use our monthly themes to unpack how running culture intersects with these oppressive systems. So, for example, every month we focus on a different theme. Last month we focused on body positivity and how it's been co-opted by brands to represent one thing and it's lost its roots, which was which stemmed from fat activism. And so we we tackle these bigger issues as a community, and the whole idea is just to show women that collectively we can heal together, and there are possible ways of overcoming these barriers, and doing so in community is a lot more easier than doing it on your own.
There's a lot of things to unpack here. Good things, but just so I guess I'll touch on you're talking about the idea of some of these positive themes being co-opted by corporations, basically is like a means of marketing and virtue signaling almost. And or maybe not almost, the qualifier is probably like not needed there. Um, uh, my brain is not fast enough to work this out, so I'm hoping you can help me. I think about as anybody listening knows, I try to work these things out in real time, and sometimes my brain doesn't work right. So I always say I'll just make an ass of myself, and then you can help me figure it out. So when I think about, let's say, like women's empowerment or just self-love in general, right? Um, pick a niche, doesn't really matter. There's going to be some brand that, big or small, that probably identifies and uses it as a marketing message. In some ways, I can see it as like obviously, this conversation is associated with my brand, and I'm not trying to just like co-opt what you have to say. I'm hopefully giving you a platform to speak your mind, and I try to do that from a place of authenticity. But I also think about like as you scale that message, do you lose that authenticity? And then I guess I don't know that I have a question, but just I'm thinking about the conflict between having a big platform. So let's say like I'm a nobody basically, but let's say like a major brand, a Nike, a Gatorade, whoever, it's like a multinational kind of brand.
Mm.
Co-ops a message. Obviously, that message now gets in front of a lot more people, and hopefully they can see, as you mentioned, like that there are other people that identify maybe as they do or that share similar stories. But then also the brand gets that positive feedback by association, when the message may in some ways get watered down at the same time and lose that authenticity. So I guess I'm just asking for your thoughts. Maybe like I said, it's not a fully cogent question by any means, but I'm just trying to think about the dichotomy between like trying to help people come together and share their stories with one another, and then seeing seeing that other people share similar ideologies or experiences, brands' ability to share that message quickly, but then also the negative side of that. So I guess could you talk to me about that situation and your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I feel like with brands, they tend to, like, they're driven by sales, and so what sells is what they're going to focus on. And so when it comes to body positivity, this messaging right now, which emphasizes, empowerment and feelings and bodies, um, it resonates with a lot of people. And at the same time, you know, I would say, like, with the brands, what ends up happening and what's the downside to them using their platform to share this messaging is that it's certain people that get centered and are represented with this messaging to make it sell. And that leaves out a huge, vast number of other folks that are not, like, like, won't necessarily result in sales. Or, okay, so for example, I'll get more specific because I feel like I'm just talking very vaguely right now. Okay,
That's
so
what I do. It's okay.
to be to be more specific, so the messaging of body positivity right now, if you search it up on Instagram, tends to center a lot of thin, white, able-bodied, you know, cis women, and women that don't feel confident in their bodies for whatever reasons, like, let's say, having rolls and cellulite and, extra body fat. That messaging, although positive, for lack of a better word, doesn't really tackle the real issue that is, what most folks in marginalized bodies are fighting for, which is, for example, fat activists talking about, anti-fat bias and weight stigma and all of these things. They're not sexy to talk about. So um, that often gets left off on the side. And then, it's just about targeting the majority and making sales and capturing a new audience with this messaging. That's what it turns into. So body positivity, as it is right now, has become that. It's just an empty slogan, I would say. It's not doing much to target those systemic issues that exist in our societies that force folks to want to change their bodies or control their bodies to fit in and to feel like they belong and to feel like they're worthy. I hope that answers.
I don't think anything with a conversation with me has a straight, this is the absolute answer. So I wouldn't feel obligated in that regard. This is something I guess I'll say I struggle with. Obviously, as a relatively thin, straight white guy, I'm very overrepresented in all kinds of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, just clones of me are everywhere, pretty much. And I try to be conscious of, like, when I'm putting together, like right now, I just redid labels for my, like, swim series, and I need photos and stuff with people, and so I try to be conscious of uh, getting, like, a diverse group of men and women. Actually, it's more women that use the product, um, to, model with it, I'm also limited by like who's available in my own price range.
Mm.
But the thing I struggle with is I, and maybe this is like imposter syndrome. So maybe I'm seeking validation. I don't know. Again, it's not completely thought out, but the thing I struggle with is like, I want to try to be authentic and not just be like I mentioned earlier, like just virtue signaling, like, oh, look at my diverse portfolio of people that are modeling with my product. You know what I mean? Like, that's just bullshit. Like that, if you come from that place, and that's like, I'm not trying to come from that place, but like I question myself. I'm like, try like how do I do this authentically? I think is the thing that I struggle with, because I run a
Mm.
company and I do want to sell products, but
Mm.
it's like, and I also understand it, and not, and try to understand and hear the realities of people that don't look like me. So I guess, can you hopefully educate me a little bit and give me a little insight, like how would you, I guess, approach my situation if you were in my shoes?
I feel like just drawing an awareness to the fact that that is a struggle that you're faced with, you know. First of all, you're trying to sell a product and you know your audience better. It's probably a majority of folks that have this the privileges of being in an able body, a smaller body. Um, so that is one thing. The other thing is like the market for folks in larger bodies, like, you know, I can't speak to it exactly, like when it comes to product and stuff, because I'm not in that field. But what I think is like a lot of brands do say that it costs money to make products a certain way. And I feel like that sometimes is just an excuse. And we need to be talking to, like, even me sitting here right now, I am in a smaller body, I am in an able body. So unless I have that conversation with someone who doesn't have those privileges, will I know how to go about doing it differently, you know? And just to come back to Project Love Run and the space that we have, we're trying to foster that. And so for me, sharing this theme, even on the commodification of body positivity, speaking to it, I am not someone who identifies as a fat person. And when I'm using that, I'm using it in a neutral term. Um, but I'm there speaking as an ally, drawing an awareness to how our societies are um, are set up to favor folks in, you know, smaller bodies or in certain ways. So um, I think, yeah, just initiating those conversations with the right people is a place to start, I would say, and then centering their experience and trying to incorporate that somehow into what you're doing. Like, yeah, I hope I
Yeah,
answered.
no,
I
you're
can
right.
talk more about how this like this theme intersects with running culture, but when it comes to the product itself, like I don't have much experience
Yeah, no, it doesn't
selling
have to
product.
be my particular product. It's just, like I said, it's just trying to come from that place of like, so like I know, you know, because it's my job to try to learn about these things. I sometimes like think about, like, I've referred to this on the previous podcast, um, throughout the years. Which ones I couldn't tell you at this point, but like the dark side of marketing is what I like to refer to it as. Like it's almost like Star Wars. Like there's the light side and there's the dark side, and like your goal is obviously to persuade somebody to buy something. Um, hopefully from a place of like, I genuinely want to help them and I want to show them that this product can help them with their problem.
Mm.
But the like the dark side of marketing, and I'll refer to it as the dark side of marketing, like preys on your insecurities and then uses those insecurities as a point of persuasion to go like, you're not good enough, but if you buy this special thing, like it's gonna fill that hole in your heart.
Yeah.
And that's the part where it's like, I think is a very clear line of delineation where you go, okay, that's not right. But it's like
Mm.
there's gray in between where it's like sometimes like as an example, what like my best selling product deals with uh, like fungus on your skin, which is not like a fun conversation, but for most people to have, right? And that it's in itself can lead to like insecurities. So it's like that product can help you with that problem, which leads to insecurities. But I have the option to go either way, like to prey on the insecurities and be like, nobody loves you unless you use this product, or I can be like, no, like it'll just solve the problem. Like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit, but um, it, it it's it's a tough position to be in, I think. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, a
and
place of privilege, but a tough position nonetheless.
I think I think interrogating that and asking why is it set up that way? Like
Right.
why is it this way? And if you unpack that further, you'll realize that our societies are governed by, white supremacy and these other oppressive systems that make it that way. So I think just realizing that is a big step in moving in a different direction and making attempts to disrupt that system.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that is tough, and I think people would certainly disagree with me, and I'm open to being wrong about. So gosh, why did I just forget her name? It'll come to me. Another guest. We're having a really good conversation, basically about like the systems of oppression that exist within our cultures. We'll speak to the North American culture since I don't really know enough about cultures abroad to speak to them, um, and how it's hard. Number one, to identify them, especially if you benefit from them, i.e., me, because I get the positive right. Like I get the positive side of it. Like I don't things go smoothly for me or smoother.
Mm.
Um, and so it's sometimes I think it's difficult for people that benefit from a system to be self-aware enough to realize that there are parts of that system in place that don't benefit others. It takes,
Mm.
I think, one, empathy. Because if you lack empathy, like you're going to be like, as the often thrown around phrase on the internet, fuck you, I got mine. You know what I mean? Like you go, well, I'm good. Don't need to help anybody else.
Mm.
Um, but the thing I think is difficult, that I struggle with for various reasons is that when you were trying to combat a system of oppression, regardless of what it is, coming at it from a place of creation and building in a positive direction, I'll say more like Martin Luther King, like nonviolent protest, or Gandhi. Um, but this is where I say people might certainly disagree with me, because there are some who would say, well, violent revolution is the only answer to a violent system of oppression. And I will be the first to admit, I certainly don't have the answer.
Mm.
I'm willing to try to struggle with it, but I don't have the answer. But I'd like to think the kind of like idealist in me goes like, I wish love could change all. You know what I mean? Like it, it's tough because it feels like violence only begets more violence. Even
Mm.
if it does break a system of oppression, does it create a new system of oppression which then needs to be broken? So I just, again, it's a question I don't have an answer to.
Yeah. Well, see, okay. For me, I I know that for so many reasons, a lot of folks, the idea of, you know, self-love and that messaging feels just so out of touch and so very woo-woo. And I think just drawing an awareness to that fact that not everyone is at that place. And I'll just use again Project Cleverin as an example.
Yeah,
So
yeah, please.
our community is founded on a love ethic, and I'm inspired by folks like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde, and using their messaging to just bring women together and just having them, like having us in community share stories of how a lot of us are navigating inherited body shame, and that makes us feel unworthy. And then also sharing stories about how a lot of us are conditioned to believe that our bodies need constant fixing and that these products are going to be the solution to that. And, you know, just showcasing constantly that all of these issues are a byproduct of our loveless societies that are governed by these oppressive systems. And these systems profit off our insecurities, just like what you were saying. So I I hear I hear when folks say that you need like a stronger force, or you know what you said, violence, and to uproot and disrupt these systems, I don't really agree with that messaging. I feel like, you know, to learn to love yourself in a world that makes you feel unloved and unworthy is like a superpower. And then once you've discovered that self love, you're more able to love other folks as a result. And you start to learn the truth about how our systems of domination operate. And they benefit from us feeling like we need to go against each other and go against ourselves. Um, and we're not going to do that. We're going to choose to love, to move against these prevailing values of the culture of dominance, if that makes any sense. But you know, using self-love as that starting place to work towards something different than what already exists. Oops. Yeah.
No, I'm with you. Filson, as we're excuse me, as we're kind of running down on time, I ask everybody the same question for a season. So I have a new question every single season. And this season's question I like to ask you, I'm hoping, or I think you'll probably have a unique answer, is how do you celebrate your wins?
How do I celebrate my wins? Uh, Taking a moment, just a moment to reflect on all it took to get there, and just living in that moment for a bit longer. And I do that by just constantly journaling and reflecting my thoughts on, yeah, on on the small things, the small feats.
It's something I like that question. My an entrepreneur friend of mine suggested that for me. She suggests, much like the why question, that we don't celebrate our wins enough.
Mm.
So that's why I wanted to focus on it this season. to hopefully bring some collective wisdom. Because at the end of the year, then we put all of the answers together into like a mega video. So I'm hopefully can help people find new ways to acknowledge that they should celebrate their wins. I'm terrible at that. Working on it, and and then hopefully see different ways that you can do that. It's not always about a big, outward show and parties. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, maybe it's just taking a moment and reflecting or writing down,
Mm-hmm.
about what it is. So thank you for sharing that. Um, those if people want to find you, engage with Project Love Run, where can they do that?
Well, on Instagram, you can find us on the gram, like they say, at Project Love Run, and at for the community updates and inspiration. And then for my personal account, that is Runner's Instinct, at Runner's Instinct. I also do write on the blog quite a lot on projectclubrun.com, so they can check that out, the website. And yeah,
Sounds good.
that's pretty
Thanks.
much
Thanks
where
for
you can
hanging out
find
with
me.
me today.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great conversation. And yeah, nice chatting with you as well.